They left their sick grandmother on her knees in the middle of an empty county road, her wrists tied together with a rough rope, while their black Mercedes idled behind her, like she was nothing but a problem they wanted to get rid of. "Grandma, please, just stay here," one of the grandsons said, annoyed, avoiding eye contact as if even looking at her made the situation inconvenient. The other grandson, colder, stepped closer. "You're making everything harder than it needs to be. Someone will come by. Just wait." Can you imagine that? A 78-year-old woman, trembling, weak, confused, left tied up on the asphalt by the very boys she once carried in her arms, because that's exactly what happened to Margaret, a grandmother from Ohio who gave everything she had to the family she loved. She tried to lift her hands, but the rope cut into her skin. Her voice cracked. "Why are you doing this to me? What did I do wrong?" Neither grandson answered. They stood there, two grown men in clean shirts and polished shoes, watching her cry as if her pain didn't matter at all. Papers scattered across the road, the wind pushing them like little reminders of the life she once held together. Then the car door slammed, the engine roared, and the Mercedes pulled away, leaving Margaret tied, scared, and alone on that long, lonely stretch of road. But here's the part her grandsons had no idea about. That cruel moment, that heartless choice, was the beginning of a truth that would come back to them like a storm, one they weren't prepared for. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what fate brings back will shake you deeply. Margaret didn't come from much. She grew up in a small rural town in southern Ohio, in a simple white house that always smelled like fresh cornbread and old wooden floors warmed by the sun. Her parents weren't wealthy, but they were steady people, farm workers who believed in early mornings, honesty, and doing right by others even when nobody was watching. As a young girl, she learned the kind of things life teaches slowly: how to patch clothes, how to stretch a dollar, how to treat neighbors with kindness, and how to keep going even on days when everything felt heavy. She was quiet, gentle, and always thinking of someone else before herself. She married young, at 22, to a man named Harold Bennett. Harold was a quiet factory worker from Cincinnati who wore the same brown boots until the soles gave out. He wasn't the kind of man who said, "I love you," often, but he showed it in small ways, fixing whatever broke, warming up her car on cold mornings, bringing her coffee before sunrise even when he was tired. They didn't have much, but they had each other. And for Margaret, that was enough. Years passed, and they built a life that was simple but steady. A small home with peeling paint, a porch swing Harold fixed 3 different times, a radio that crackled with old country songs every Sunday morning. Margaret loved those quiet routines, the smell of fresh coffee, the sound of Harold's heavy steps, the way the curtains danced whenever a summer breeze slipped through the window. But they never had children of their own. It wasn't by choice. After 2 miscarriages and long nights of tears Harold never quite knew how to fix, Margaret had to learn to live with a quiet ache in her chest. She didn't talk about it. She simply tucked the pain away, the same way she folded linens and kept things in order. Life went on. Her younger sister Linda had children, 2 boys she adored like her own, Michael and Daniel. When those boys were little, Margaret babysat them every weekend. She packed snacks for them, brushed dirt off their scraped knees, took them for walks by the cornfields behind her house. She knew every one of their laughs, every silly fear, every dream they carried in their pockets. They would run to her, arms wide, calling Aunt Maggie, like she was the sun. And in many ways, she was. When Harold died of a sudden heart attack at 58, those boys were the ones who kept Margaret standing. They were in their teens then, lanky, loud, always hungry, but they still came by her house after school, raiding her fridge, leaving their shoes anywhere, filling the place with noise that reminded her she wasn't alone. They were her joy, her comfort, her reason to keep the porch light on. But time has its own way of stealing people. Years went by, and Michael and Daniel grew up fast. College, jobs, busy schedules, new priorities. Little by little, the phone calls became shorter. The visits stopped being weekly, then monthly, then yearly. and eventually, almost never. Margaret tried to understand. People grow. People change. But sometimes, late at night, she would sit at the kitchen table with a cup of warm tea, hands wrapped around it for comfort, and wonder when exactly she had stopped being part of their world. Still, she never stopped loving them. That was something age couldn't take from her. Linda, her sister, stayed close. She often said, "Margaret, they're overwhelmed, that's all. Life gets messy, give them time." Margaret nodded, even when it hurt. She believed Linda. She trusted the best in people, especially the boys she once raised with her own hands. And when she got sick, when the doctor gently told her she wasn't getting any younger, and her health was changing more than she was admitting, the only thing she wanted was to see them again, to feel like family still meant something, to know she hadn't loved in vain. She never imagined, not even in her darkest fears, that those same boys, those same little arms that once wrapped around her neck, would one day tie her hands and leave her alone on a cold road. But that part of the story, we're not there yet. Margaret had always been the kind of woman who carried more weight than she ever let anyone see. She wasn't built for complaining. She came from a generation that believed you kept going even when life wasn't gentle with you. That belief shaped her entire adult life. After Harold passed, money became tight. There were nights when Margaret chose soup for dinner not because she liked it, but because canned soup cost less and lasted longer. She didn't tell anyone, not even Linda. She didn't want to be a burden. She just quietly adjusted, the way she always had. She took odd jobs around the neighborhood, sewing hems, mending shirts, babysitting for young couples who worked late shifts. People trusted her because she showed up on time, remembered birthdays, and treated everyone's children as if they were precious. But nothing made her happier than the weekends with Michael and Daniel. Those boys were the closest thing she ever had to children of her own. When they were little, she used to wake up early on Saturdays just to prepare things that made them smile. She'd whisk pancake batter until it was smooth, warm up the old skillet, and listen for the familiar thundering sound of small feet running up her porch steps. They always burst through the door without knocking. "Aunt Maggie, pancakes?" Daniel would ask before even saying good morning. She would pretend to be surprised. "Oh, I didn't know anyone was hungry around here." Michael, the older one by 2 years, always rolled his eyes in an exaggerated way. "Aunt Maggie, you say that every time." And Margaret would laugh, a soft, warm laugh that filled the whole kitchen. They spent entire afternoons in the yard behind her house. She pushed them on the old tire swing Harold once hung from the maple tree. She taught them how to skip rocks on the pond that sat just past the cornfield. She stitched little patches onto their jackets when they tore holes climbing fences. Everything she did was with care, with intention, with that quiet love that doesn't need to be spoken out loud. The boys made her feel alive again. She kept an old shoebox under her bed, filled with tiny pieces of their childhood, crayon drawings, a broken toy car, notes the boys had written saying, "Thank you, Aunt Maggie," in shaky handwriting. Every item was a memory she refused to let fade. Sometimes on lonely nights she'd open the box and hold those little reminders just to feel close to the past. It kept her steady. It reminded her she mattered to someone once. Linda always said, "You raised them more than I did, Margaret. You were their safe place." And that was true. When Michael scraped his knee badly one summer, he ran past his own mother's house and went straight to Margaret's door. When Daniel failed a math test in school and cried until his face was red, it was Margaret who sat with him on the porch and said, "One bad day doesn't decide your whole life, sweetheart." Those boys idolized her. They trusted her with everything. They loved her in that pure, uncomplicated way children love the person who makes them feel safe. But life has seasons, and seasons change. As they got older, the boys drifted toward the world and away from Margaret. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't cruel. It just happened. Michael got a job offer in Cleveland. Daniel enrolled in a business program in Columbus. Their lives became fast, busy, full of deadlines and expectations, and people who didn't know anything about pancake Saturdays or tire swings or the smell of Margaret's cornbread. Margaret adjusted again, quietly, the way she always did. She didn't beg them to visit. She didn't guilt-trip anyone. She simply waited, hoping the seasons would shift once more and bring them back to her porch someday. But then the visits became rare, and the calls? Short, rushed, sometimes forgotten. Still, she held on to hope, because love doesn't disappear just because life gets crowded. She remembered every birthday. She still baked cookies on holidays, just in case they stopped by. She kept the house tidy, the porch swept, the guest room ready. She believed there would come a day when the boys would remember who she was to them, everything she had given, everything she had poured into their lives. But she never imagined that the next time they would ask her to come along, it wouldn't be for a visit. It would be for the moment that broke her heart in ways she never thought possible. As the years rolled forward, Michael and Daniel stepped into adulthood with a kind of determination Margaret always admired but never fully understood. They weren't boys anymore. They were men, busy men, who lived in a faster, louder world than the one that raised them. Michael got promoted quickly. He worked for a financial firm in Cleveland, the kind with glass walls and long hours and people who lived on caffeine and ambition. His suits got sharper, his schedule got tighter, even his voice changed, shorter sentences, quicker conversations, always checking the time. Daniel followed a similar path. He jumped from internships to opportunities, networking with people who used words Margaret never heard before. Market trends, optimization, scaling. His life became a string of meetings and deadlines and nights spent staring at glowing screens. Success didn't just come to them. It swallowed them. It shaped the way they talked, the way they moved, the way they saw the world. At first, Margaret was proud. She kept every business card they gave her. She displayed a framed picture of the two of them at their college graduation. She told the ladies at church, "They're doing so well. I always knew they would." But with success came distance, not just physical, emotional. Phone calls became rare events. When Margaret picked up, she often heard, "Grandma, I can't talk long," or "I'll call you back later," and sometimes they simply hung up before she could finish her sentence. She tried not to take it personally. She told Linda, "They're busy. That's how life is nowadays." Linda would shake her head gently. Busy or not, family is family. They'll come around. But deep down, Margaret felt something shifting. It was small at first, like a loose thread. Then it grew. Holidays changed. Michael and Daniel started arriving late, or not at all. Thanksgiving dinner used to be filled with their laughter, with the boys stealing rolls from the basket and Margaret pretending not to see them. But now the chairs stayed empty. Linda always made excuses for them. They're traveling. Work held them back. You know how it is. Margaret nodded, even when her heart dropped a little more each year. The visits that did happen were different. The boys didn't sit on the porch or ask about her garden. They didn't look around the old house the way they used to, amazed by the same things they had loved as kids. Now they walked in with quick glances, like they were checking the time. Michael would say, "We can't stay long." Daniel added, "We still have things to do." Margaret always smiled and said, "It's okay, honey. I'm glad to see you even for a minute." But when the door closed and she was alone again in her quiet living room, she felt a weight she couldn't explain. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was something softer, almost like being forgotten. The boys didn't do it out of cruelty. They were swept into a world that moved too fast, that demanded too much, a world that didn't leave room for porch swings or Sunday morning pancakes. Still, Margaret kept believing, kept hoping, kept waiting. She ironed their favorite tablecloth every Christmas. She left their old bedroom exactly the way it had been. She baked the same cookies she used to make when they were children, placing them carefully in a tin, just in case. But the years kept stretching. Linda, meanwhile, tried her best to hold the family together. She visited Margaret often, bringing flowers, groceries, warm hugs. She never spoke badly of her sons, even when their absence was obvious. She always said, "Mom loves you, you know that. She's proud of you." Margaret clung to those words. She needed them. Then came the health changes. Margaret started slowing down. Mornings felt heavier. Walking from the porch to the mailbox took longer. Her hands trembled sometimes, and she hid it by keeping them folded in her lap. She didn't want to burden anyone, not Linda, not the boys. So she stayed quiet about her doctor visits, about the new pills she had to take, about the way her breath sometimes failed her when she climbed the back porch steps. But news traveled on its own. Linda eventually told the boys, "Your grandmother isn't doing so well. She needs you." Michael said, "Work's been crazy. I'll try." Daniel said, "I'll see if I can make time next month." Margaret never blamed them. She simply waited, the same way she always had. Until one day the boys reached out, not for a visit, not to help, but for something completely different. Something Margaret didn't expect. Something that would lead to the worst moment of her life. But that part is still coming. Margaret always believed she could handle loneliness. She had lived through worse things: poverty, loss, the long nights after Harold died. She thought she knew how to sit with her own silence and be okay. But something changed when her health started slipping. The quiet didn't comfort her anymore. It scared her. There were mornings when she woke up and needed a few seconds to steady herself before standing. There were days when she forgot small things, where she put her glasses, whether she had already taken her pills. The mirror told her the truth before anyone else did. She was getting older, and fast. That realization did something to her heart. It made her long for the boys. Not the men they had become, rushed, distracted, distant, but the boys she raised, the ones who laughed on her porch and hugged her with sticky hands and ran to her when they were scared. She missed them in a way that ached. One evening she sat by the kitchen window looking out at the dimming sky over Ohio farmland. The radio played softly in the background, an old country station that always reminded her of Harold. Margaret wrapped her sweater tighter around her shoulders and whispered to herself, "I just want to see them again, even once." She didn't hear Linda walk in until her daughter put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Mom, are you okay?" Margaret nodded, but Linda saw the truth in her eyes. She pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "You've been quiet lately," Linda said. "I'm fine, sweetheart," Margaret insisted, but her voice cracked just enough to betray her. Linda reached across the table, taking her hand. "You miss the boys." It wasn't a question. It was the truth spoken out loud. Margaret lowered her head. "I don't want to bother them." "You're not bothering anyone," Linda said softly. "They're your grandsons. They need to show up, and I'm going to help make that happen." For the first time in weeks, Margaret felt a small spark of hope. Linda picked up her phone that same night and called Michael and Daniel separately. She didn't yell, but her tone was firmer than usual. "Your grandmother wants to see you," she said. "She misses you. She's not doing well. This is important." Michael responded first. "Mom, work is insane right now. Could we plan something later?" Daniel chimed in similarly. "I'm busy too, but maybe soon." Linda didn't push. She knew better, but she made it clear. "You boys need to make time." She won't ask twice. Margaret overheard parts of the conversation from the hallway. She didn't step in. She didn't want to seem like she was begging. But the hope stayed with her. Quiet, warm, delicate. Over the next few days she prepared in small ways, just in case. She washed the good tablecloth. She set out the old photo albums. She made a batch of oatmeal cookies, her signature recipe. But nothing happened. A week passed. Then two. No visit. No call. Just silence. Then, on a Friday afternoon, Margaret received a message. Short, unexpected, almost rushed. "Grandma, we're going to be near the old county road this weekend for a fundraising event. Maybe you could meet us there?" The text was from Daniel. Michael had added a thumbs-up emoji beneath it. Margaret read the message 3 times before sitting down slowly at the edge of her bed. Her hands trembled, not from illness this time, but from something that felt like relief. She whispered, "They want to see me." She didn't know it yet, but that little spark of hope would soon become the deepest cut she had ever felt. Saturday morning came with gray skies and cold air. Margaret put on her warmest sweater and buttoned a beige cardigan over it. She fixed her hair carefully, smoothing down every strand. She grabbed an envelope full of old photos. Pictures of the boys as children, smiling wide, sunlight in their eyes. She wanted to show them who they used to be. She wanted to remind them of something warm. Linda offered to drive her, but Margaret insisted she could take the bus. "I'll be fine," she said, smiling. The bus ride was slow, quiet. Margaret held the envelope on her lap the whole time. She imagined hugging the boys. She imagined hearing them laugh again. She imagined leaving that meeting a little lighter. But when she arrived at the old county road, there was no fundraiser, no music, no families, just the sound of distant wind moving through empty fields, and a black Mercedes approaching slowly. At that moment, Margaret didn't feel afraid. She felt hopeful. She had no idea what was truly waiting for her. When the black Mercedes rolled to a stop, Margaret felt her heart lift, just a little. She took a small step forward, waving timidly as the tinted window lowered. Michael was in the driver's seat. Daniel sat beside him, scrolling on his phone. Neither of them smiled. "Grandma, get in," Michael said flatly, not even turning off the engine. Margaret hesitated, glancing around. I thought there was a fundraiser here." Daniel let out a long breath, frustrated. "There was a change of plans. Just get in, please. We don't have all day." Margaret nodded and opened the back door. The car smelled like leather and expensive cologne, so different from the old fabric softener scent that clung to her sweaters. She held the envelope of photos close to her chest, hoping this would still turn into a warm moment. But the atmosphere in the car was cold. Michael kept checking the time. Daniel answered work messages while sighing loudly. Margaret tried to fill the silence. "I brought some pictures of you boys when you were little. I thought, maybe you'd like to see—" "Grandma, not now," Daniel cut in, his tone sharp. "We seriously don't have time for this." Margaret shut her mouth gently, folding the envelope on her lap. They drove down a long, empty county road, the fields stretching endlessly on both sides. The sky above was heavy, gray. Margaret watched the landscape roll by, wondering why everything felt so wrong. Finally, Michael pulled over. The tires crunched on gravel. He didn't bother to park straight. Daniel turned around in his seat, expression tight. "Grandma, we need to talk." Margaret's throat tightened. "Is everything okay? Did I do something?" Michael rubbed his forehead. "Look, you're making things complicated for Mom. She's stressed enough as it is. But Linda never said—" Daniel cut her off with a dismissive wave. "You ask for help with bills. You call too much. You show up without warning. It's too much." Margaret blinked quickly, trying to understand. "I only call because I miss you." The brothers exchanged a look, cold, impatient. Michael opened his door. "Let's just do this." He stepped out of the car, walked around, and opened her door. Margaret tried to stand, but her legs shook slightly. "Michael, sweetheart, what's going on?" she whispered. Daniel got out too. He held a piece of rope in his hand. Margaret's stomach dropped. "Please, boys, what is that for?" Daniel didn't answer. He simply said, "We can't take you with us, and we can't bring you back to Mom's right now. She needs space. We need space." Michael added, "You'll be fine. Someone will pass by soon." "Mom." Margaret stepped back, terrified in a way she couldn't fully express. "I don't understand. I just came because you asked. I thought we were going to spend time together." Daniel sighed loudly, like she was being unreasonable. "Grandma, please don't make this harder." Before she could react, Michael gently, not violently, took her hands and pulled them together. Daniel quickly wrapped the rope around her wrists. Not tight enough to injure, but tight enough that she couldn't pull away. Margaret gasped, her voice trembling. "Michael, Daniel, please, what are you doing?" Michael avoided her eyes. We just need you to stay here for a bit." "Stay here?" she repeated, confused. "In the cold? On the road?" Daniel rolled his eyes. "It's not that cold, and someone will pass by eventually. Just wait." Margaret felt her knees weaken. Her heart pounded painfully in her chest. "You're leaving me? Like this? Why?" she cried softly. Neither of them answered. The Mercedes door slammed. The engine roared. Michael shifted into drive. Margaret took one step forward, hands bound, voice breaking. "Please don't leave me, please. I love you." For a second. Just one. Daniel looked at her through the rear window. No emotion, just impatience. Then the car sped away. Dust rose behind the Mercedes, swirling through the gray air as Margaret fell to her knees on the cold asphalt. The envelope of photos slipped from her sweater and scattered across the road. Pictures of two little boys who once adored her, carried now by the wind like pieces of a story no one cared to remember. Margaret sobbed quietly, her hands tied, her heart breaking in a way she didn't know was possible. What she didn't know, what the boys had no clue about, was that someone else saw the car leave, someone who recognized her, someone who wasn't willing to let this end the way her grandsons intended. And that moment would change everything. Stay with me, because what comes next will shake your heart even deeper. For a long moment the only sound Margaret heard was the fading echo of the Mercedes disappearing down the long stretch of road. The wind brushed against her face, cold and sharp, carrying the smell of distant farmland. She tried to stand, but her knees felt weak, and her hands were tied too tightly for her to push herself up properly. She had never felt so small, so forgotten, so painfully unimportant. A soft cry escaped her lips, quiet, almost like she was afraid the world would hear her shame. She looked down at the photos scattered across the road. Some were caught in the cracks of the asphalt. Others fluttered against the grass at the edge. Pictures of two boys smiling in the sun. Pictures she kept safe for decades. Pictures she brought because she thought it would make them happy. She tried to reach them, but the rope around her wrists made it impossible. Her heart sank deeper. "How did we get here?" she whispered to no one. Seconds passed. Minutes. The cold settled into her bones. She didn't even notice the truck coming down the road until she heard tires skidding lightly on gravel. A red pickup slowed beside her. "Margaret? Is that you?" The voice was familiar, steady, concerned, older. She looked up and saw Tom Harrison, her neighbor from the next road over. He'd known her for years, brought her apples from his orchard every fall, helped fix her mailbox twice after storms knocked it down. He jumped out of the truck, his boots hitting the ground hard. "Good Lord! What happened to you?" Margaret's cheeks burned with shame. She lowered her eyes. I fell," she tried to say, but her voice broke. Tom crouched in front of her, gently lifting her chin so she would look at him. "Margaret, your hands. Someone tied you." She closed her eyes, unable to hold back the tears. "It was the boys," she whispered. Tom froze. "Michael and Daniel did this?" Margaret nodded slowly, tears falling onto her sweater. "They said someone would come by eventually. They just left." Tom wasn't a man who got angry easily, but the look in his eyes shifted. Disbelief, then disappointment, then a quiet, simmering anger that made his jaw tighten. "Those boys," he muttered, standing. He pulled a small pocket-knife from his belt and with careful hands cut the rope around her wrists. As soon as the rope fell, Margaret rubbed her hands, trying to warm them. Tom offered his arm, and she leaned on it as she stood, slow, shaky, embarrassed. "I'm sorry you had to see me like this," she whispered. "You don't apologize for their mistakes," Tom said firmly. "You hear me? This isn't on you." He walked with her to the truck, moving slowly so she wouldn't stumble. Before helping her in, he bent down and gathered every photo he could find. He dusted off the dirt and placed them gently in her lap. "You keep these," he said softly. "They matter. They always have." Margaret's throat tightened. "Thank you, Tom." He nodded but didn't smile. His eyes stayed on the empty road ahead. "I'm driving you home," he said, "and after that we're calling Linda. She needs to know what her sons did. This can't stay quiet." Margaret shook her head quickly. "No, please, don't tell her. She'll blame herself, and I don't want trouble." Tom took a long breath. "Margaret, what they did is wrong, truly wrong. I know," she whispered, wiping her cheeks. "But they're still my grandsons." Tom didn't argue, but the silence that followed told her he disagreed. The drive back to her house was quiet. Margaret held the photos tightly, as though afraid someone might take them away. Every bump in the road made her feel the bruise beginning to form on her knees. Her wrists were red where the rope had been, She stared out the window, watching the fields blur by. Inside her something shifted. Not anger. She wasn't built for that. Not hate. She loved too deeply. But something broke. Something quiet. Something she wasn't sure she could ever fix. When Tom pulled into her driveway, he turned off the engine and looked at her gently. "You deserve better, Margaret. Don't forget that." She nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed it. Once inside her home, she went straight to the kitchen table, placed the photographs in a neat pile and sat down slowly, her hands trembling. For the first time in her life, she didn't want to remember. She didn't want to revisit the sweet memories that used to warm her heart, because now they only made the pain sharper. Margaret understood something important that evening. The boys she raised, the boys who once loved her more than anything, were gone. And the men they had become, she didn't recognize them anymore. But even in her heartbreak, fate was already turning quietly behind the scenes, and the road ahead, though painful, held a truth that would not stay buried much longer. The next morning the house felt different, not because anything had changed inside it, but because something had changed inside her. Margaret moved slowly through the kitchen, setting a small kettle on the stove, waiting for the familiar whistle that usually brought some comfort. Today, the sound felt hollow. She poured the hot water over her tea bag, hands trembling slightly, and sat at the table where she had spent so many mornings watching the sun rise over the old backyard maple tree. The photos from yesterday were stacked neatly in front of her. She didn't open them. Not yet. Maybe not for a while. Outside, the world went on like it always did. Birds chirped. A neighbor's dog barked. Cars passed on the distant road that connected her little corner of Ohio to the rest of the town. But something inside Margaret felt still, like her heart was trying to catch up with everything that happened. She whispered to herself, "I'm still here. I'm still me." Not to convince anyone else, just to remind her own heart that it hadn't disappeared. Later that morning, she pulled on her coat and walked out to the porch. The boards creaked under her feet, the same creak Harold used to promise he'd fix one of these weekends. The winter air bit at her cheeks, but the light felt good, clean, quiet, honest. Tom's red pickup truck rolled slowly down the road toward her house. Margaret sighed softly. She wasn't ready for questions, but she didn't want to hide either. Tom stepped out holding a small paper bag. "I brought you some apples," he said. "Fresh ones. Thought you might like them." Margaret nodded, a tiny, grateful smile forming. "Thank you, Tom. You didn't have to." "I know," he said simply, "but I wanted to." He didn't push her to talk, didn't ask what she planned to do. He just stood next to her on the porch, looking out at the quiet stretch of road like he had all the time in the world. After a moment, he said gently, "You're not alone. Whatever you think, you're not." Margaret swallowed hard. I don't understand how they changed so much." Tom nodded, hands in his pockets. "Sometimes life moves folks so fast, they forget where they came from, forget who held them up when they were small." Margaret didn't respond. She didn't have the strength to defend her grandsons anymore. Tom didn't stay long. He handed her the apples, tipped his hat, and said, "If you need anything, you call me, day or night." When he drove away, Margaret stood there a long time, watching the red taillights disappear, so different from the cold, sharp departure of the black Mercedes the day before. This one didn't hurt. This one felt steady. Inside the house, Margaret knew she needed to reclaim herself, even if just a little. So she did what she always did in hard times. She returned to her routines. She scrubbed the kitchen counters. She watered the plants in the living room. She folded laundry slowly, carefully, smoothing every wrinkle as if caring for the fabric might somehow help her care for her own heart. Later, she grabbed her canvas tote bag and walked to the small market downtown. The clerk, Mrs. Ellison, looked up and smiled warmly. "Well, if it isn't Margaret Bennett. Haven't seen you out in a bit." Margaret smiled back politely. "Just picking up a few things." Mrs. Ellison glanced at her gently. "You doing all right, dear?" Margaret hesitated, then nodded. "I'm managing." "That's what strong women do," the clerk said, ringing up her items. "But even strong women need a friend sometimes. You hear?" Margaret appreciated the kindness. even if she didn't have the strength to respond with more than a soft, "Yes, ma'am." Walking home with groceries in her bag, she passed by the old church she used to attend every Sunday. The doors were open for weekday prayer. She stepped inside quietly, sitting in the back pew. Candles flickered at the front. Dust floated in the sunlight streaming through stained glass windows. It smelled like old wood, hymn books, and memories. She closed her eyes. "Lord, help me stay strong," she whispered. "I don't ask much, just help me find my place again." No thunder, no sign, just a silent comfort settling over her chest, soft, almost imperceptible, but real. As she walked home, something inside her felt, not healed, but steadier, like her spirit was beginning to rise again, slowly, the way stubborn flowers push through frost. That night, Margaret ate a small bowl of soup and sat by the porch window, looking out into the dark. She thought about the boys, not the men who tied her hands, but the little boys who once clung to her apron and begged for pancakes. "I miss you," she whispered into the quiet. But she also knew something had changed forever. A line had been crossed. Trust had been broken. And love, though still there, was now coated in a pain she didn't know how to touch. Even so, she didn't let bitterness grow. That wasn't who she was, but the world wasn't done with her. And the truth, buried, ignored, pushed aside, was finally beginning to rise. Something was coming, something that would reveal why the boys had acted the way they did, and who had been whispering in their ears the whole time. For the next few days, Margaret did everything she could to return to normal, whatever normal meant now. She cleaned, she cooked simple meals, she went on short walks around the block. She kept herself moving not because she had the energy, but because stopping felt dangerous. If she stopped, she knew the pain would sit with her, and she wasn't ready for that. But life has a way of bringing truths to light, whether we're ready or not. It began on a Wednesday afternoon. Margaret was sitting on her porch, wrapped in a knitted shawl, watching the wind blow leftover autumn leaves along the driveway. She was sipping warm tea when she saw a familiar car approaching, Linda's. Her daughter stepped out quickly, her face tense, her eyes full of worry. "Mom," she said, rushing up the porch steps. "We need to talk." Margaret felt a small knot form in her chest. "What is it, sweetheart?" Linda sat down beside her, taking a long breath before speaking. "I talked to the boys," she began. Margaret tensed, but stayed quiet. "They told me what happened. Well, what they said happened. They made it sound like you were being dramatic, like they just dropped you off somewhere safe, and you misunderstood." Margaret looked down at her hands, still faintly marked from the rope. "I don't want to cause trouble," she murmured. Linda shook her head firmly. "It's already trouble, Mom, and it's not on you." There was a pause, quiet, heavy. Then Linda continued, voice softer but heavy with guilt. "I started noticing something strange over the past year. Every time I asked the boys to visit you, they'd say you didn't want them to. They said you seemed distant, or annoyed, or that you told them you were too tired to see them." Margaret's head snapped up. "What? I never said anything like that." "I know," Linda said quickly. "I know you didn't, but someone was telling them otherwise." Margaret felt a coldness spread through her chest. "Who?" Linda hesitated, then sighed. "It was Mark." Margaret blinked in confusion. "Your husband?" Linda nodded slowly, shame creeping across her face. "He told them not to bother you, that you needed space, that you were becoming forgetful, that visiting might confuse you. He said you were changing and it was better if they gave you distance." Margaret placed a trembling hand on the armrest. "But why would he say that? I've never been anything but kind to him." Linda's face tightened, tears shining in her eyes. "I confronted him last night. He finally admitted it. He said he thought having the boys around would pressure us financially. He was worried we'd end up taking care of you more as you got older." Margaret felt her heart crack in a different place this time, not from abandonment, but from betrayal she never imagined. "I never asked for anything," she whispered. "I know," Linda said, wiping her eyes, "and that's what makes this worse. He made them believe you didn't want them. He twisted things. And they trusted him because I trusted him. Margaret swallowed hard. She felt a mixture of confusion, hurt, disbelief. So, all this time, they stayed away because they thought I pushed them away? Linda nodded, her voice breaking. Yes, that's what they believed. Margaret leaned back on the porch chair, feeling the weight of years pressing down on her. So they weren't being cruel. Not at first. No, Linda whispered, but after so long it turned into resentment. They thought you didn't care. They thought you didn't want them around. And when people feel rejected for long enough, they start to reject back. Margaret covered her face with shaky hands. Oh, Linda, why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't know, Linda said through tears. And I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have noticed sooner. I should have asked more questions. I should have protected you. The wind rustled the porch railing, filling the heavy silence between them. Finally, Margaret spoke again, voice thin but steady. Where are the boys now? Linda hesitated. They're ashamed. They said they acted out of anger and frustration. They said they didn't mean to hurt you like that. Margaret shook her head slowly. They tied me, Linda. They left me on the road. I know, Linda whispered, and they're going to face the consequences for that. They know it too. Margaret looked out at the empty road. A road she suddenly realized she no longer feared, because truth had finally replaced confusion. Linda took her mother's hand. They want to talk to you. They want to apologize. But I told them they needed to give you time. You decide when or if you want to see them. Margaret appreciated that more than she could say. Just then, Tom's red pickup rolled down the street. He gave a small wave as he passed. Linda's eyes followed the truck. That man cares about you, she said softly. Margaret smiled a little. He's been a good friend. Linda squeezed her hand. Mom, you deserved better than all of this, and you're going to get it. I promise. Margaret didn't know what justice would look like. She didn't know how healing would happen. She didn't know if the boys could ever undo what they did. But she knew one thing now. What happened to her wasn't abandonment out of cruelty. It was abandonment built by lies. And lies, once exposed, lose all their power. The truth was finally on her side. And the next step, the step toward justice, was coming. The days after Linda revealed the truth about Mark felt strangely quiet inside Margaret's home. Not empty, just different. She moved slowly through each room, touching familiar objects as if anchoring herself to the parts of her life that were still intact. She ran her fingers across framed photos on the hallway wall, paused by the old armchair Harold used to sit in, and lingered on the porch where she had watched the sun rise for decades. Nothing outside had changed, but something inside her had shifted forever. The next morning, Margaret boiled water for tea the way she did every day, listening to the kettle whistle softly. But even the whistle seemed different to her now, sharper, more real. The truth had stripped away years of confusion and replaced it with a sense of clarity she didn't know she needed. Still, clarity didn't mean she was ready for what came next. Linda arrived that afternoon. She didn't knock. She walked straight into the kitchen with the urgency of someone who had practiced a difficult conversation in her head all night. Mom, she said gently as she sat across from her, we need to talk about what happens now. Margaret looked up, tired but calm. What do you mean? The boys want to come here, Linda said. They want to apologize. They know what they did was wrong. But before that happens, there's something important we have to do. Margaret's heart tightened. Linda, sweetheart, I'm not sure I'm ready to see them. I know, Linda replied. That's why we have to take this one step at a time. Mom, what they did wasn't just a bad decision. It was dangerous. And someone needs to acknowledge that. Margaret lowered her gaze. I don't want them arrested. Linda reached across the table and held her hand. No one is talking about arrests, but Sheriff Wallace needs to document the incident for your protection, and so the boys understand the seriousness of what happened. Margaret took a slow breath. If you think it's necessary, then let him come. Sheriff Wallace arrived later that day. He stood in her kitchen with his notepad, speaking gently, respectfully, like a man who understood the weight of someone else's humiliation. He asked what happened, and Margaret told him, not as a victim, but as someone determined to speak truth without bitterness. When he finished writing, he looked at her with deep sympathy. "Mrs. Bennet," he said, "I'm sorry you went through this. If you don't want charges filed, they won't be. But I needed to make sure there's a record. People should never treat you that way." She appreciated his kindness, even if the conversation left her exhausted. But nothing prepared her for what came the next morning. There was a knock at the door. 2 knocks, familiar, hesitant. Linda opened it, and Michael and Daniel stepped inside. They looked nothing like the cold, rushed men who had driven that black Mercedes away from her. They looked younger somehow, broken, humbled, stripped of the pride they once wore like armor. Margaret remained seated in her armchair. Her hands rested on her lap, steady but tense. Michael spoke first. "Grandma, we're so sorry." The words trembled out of him, fragile as paper. Margaret's eyes softened but did not let him off the hook. "Why did you do it?" she asked quietly. Daniel swallowed hard, eyes reddening. "Because we thought you pushed us away. For years we thought you didn't want us anymore. We thought you didn't care." Michael nodded. "We were angry, hurt, confused, and we let it grow. We listened to the wrong people. We made assumptions. We were stupid." Margaret's voice cracked. "Why didn't you come ask me?" Michael wiped his face with the back of his hand. "Because we were embarrassed. Because we thought it was too late. And because, honestly, we were too proud." Daniel sank onto his knees beside his brother. "Grandma, we don't have an excuse for the road. None. It was the worst thing we've ever done. I don't even recognize the people we were that day. I can't sleep thinking about it." Margaret hesitated, then reached out with trembling hands, one palm resting on each of their cheeks, just as she used to do when they were little boys with scraped knees and tear-streaked faces. Both men leaned into her hands like they were starving for the softness they once took for granted. "My boys," she whispered, "my sweet boys. I never pushed you away, not even for a moment." "I know," Michael said, breaking into tears. "We know that now." Linda stepped closer, her voice firm but full of pain. "There will be consequences. You two will rebuild trust slowly. You will show up. You will take responsibility. And you will not let anyone, including Mark, interfere in this family again." Michael nodded. "We will, whatever it takes." Daniel repeated the promise through quiet sobs. "We just want to make things right." Margaret took a long breath. "I'm not ready to forgive you. Not today. Maybe not tomorrow. What you did—" She paused, her eyes wet. "It broke something inside me. And healing doesn't come quickly." "We understand," Daniel said. "We don't expect forgiveness. We just want the chance to earn your trust back." Margaret studied them closely. Not the men they had become, not the boys they once were, but the fragile, complicated mix in between. Possibility. That was the word that came to her heart. Not forgiveness. Possibility. They stayed with her for a few minutes more, helping her stand, asking softly how she'd been feeling, telling her they loved her, even when their voices trembled. When they left, the house fell quiet again, but not the heavy, painful quiet of the past weeks. This quiet felt open, a doorway, not a wall. Later that afternoon, Linda returned after speaking with Sheriff Wallace. "The report's filed," she said softly. "No charges, but there's an official warning, and it's enough." Margaret nodded, feeling the weight of that truth settle into place. Justice had happened, not through punishment, but through accountability, through truth, through the broken pieces finally being seen. That evening, as the sun dipped behind Ohio's flat fields, Margaret stepped onto the porch and looked at the road where her life had split open. A red pickup approached. Tom slowed down and leaned out the window. "You doing all right, Margaret?" She nodded, a small smile forming. "I'm trying." "That's enough," Tom said. "Trying is enough." For the first time in a long while, Margaret believed those words. And tomorrow, her life would shift again, toward something new, something meaningful, something that would become her legacy, a community project that would change everything. The morning after the boys' visit, Margaret woke with a different feeling in her chest. The pain was still there, yes, but it didn't press down on her like before. It felt quieter, like something inside her was rearranging itself, making space for a new chapter she didn't know was possible. She sat up slowly, letting the early light fill her room. She buttoned her warm cardigan, smoothing the fabric with careful hands, and stepped onto her porch. The sun was just rising over the fields, turning the distant sky soft shades of pink and gold. The same road where she had been abandoned just days earlier lay still and calm, untouched by footsteps or tires that morning. She stood there for a long moment, not reliving the hurt, not drowning in fear, just breathing. She whispered to herself, "I'm still here." Later that morning, she walked to her mailbox and found a letter from the local church's community coordinator. The handwriting was neat and familiar. "Margaret, we'd love your help with the seniors' circle again. Your presence made such a difference. We miss you." Her heart stirred. Years ago, she had volunteered at the community center, teaching simple recipes, helping seniors make memory boxes, reading aloud to those who struggled to see. It had been a meaningful part of her life, a place where she felt needed, a place where she felt like she belonged. When her health declined and loneliness crept in, she had quietly stepped away. She convinced herself no one noticed. She wasn't used to being wanted anymore. The letter said otherwise. That afternoon, Tom drove up in his red pickup. He stepped out holding a cloth-wrapped bundle of freshly baked rolls. "Thought you might like these," he said, handing them to her. Margaret smiled softly. "Thank you, Tom. You're very kind." He shrugged. "You've been through enough. Let me do something small." They sat together at her kitchen table. The morning sun poured through the window, warming the wood. Tom watched her with gentle curiosity. "You seem different today," he said. Margaret showed him the letter. "They want me to help again." Tom nodded slowly. "You should. You light up when you're around people who need you." Margaret hesitated. "I don't know if I'm strong enough yet." Tom leaned in slightly. "Strength isn't about feeling ready. It's about showing up, even when you don't." She let those words settle. They didn't feel heavy. They felt true. I think I'd like to try," she whispered. "That's all it takes," Tom replied. "Just try." 2 days later, Margaret walked into the community center. The moment she stepped through the door, warm memories wrapped around her like a familiar blanket. The smell of old books, the sound of soft chatter, the sight of seniors gathered around tables working on small crafts. It all felt like coming home. Ruth, one of the longtime volunteers, spotted her instantly. "Well, look who's back," she said, hurrying over. "Margaret Bennett, we've missed you around here." Margaret felt her cheeks warm. "I wasn't sure anyone would remember me." "Remember you?" Ruth scoffed lightly. "You were the heart of this place." Margaret followed Ruth to a table where a group of women sat with fabrics, glue, and little trinkets spread out. They were making memory boards, a project Margaret herself had once introduced. Seeing it again nearly brought tears to her eyes. Without being asked, she stepped in gently, showing one woman how to secure a corner, helping another choose colors that matched. Her voice, soft and patient, drew the women in. At one point, Esther, a quiet woman with silver hair pinned neatly back, touched Margaret's wrist. "Thank you," she whispered. "My husband struggled with remembering things near the end. Doing this, it helps me feel close to him again." Margaret's eyes softened. "Memories don't disappear, Esther. They just need a place to rest." By the end of the day, Margaret felt tired, but in the good way, the way you feel after doing something meaningful. As she walked home, the cold air brushed her cheeks, and she realized something quietly beautiful. She wasn't just rebuilding her life, she was being pulled toward her purpose. The next morning, the community center called. "Margaret, would you consider leading a weekly circle for seniors dealing with loneliness?" the coordinator asked. "No one reaches them the way you do." Margaret pressed a hand to her chest. "Me? Lead something?" "Yes," the coordinator said warmly. "You have a gift." After a long pause, Margaret whispered, "I'd be honored." That same afternoon, as she prepared tea, she heard a gentle knock. When she opened the door, Michael and Daniel stood there holding a casserole dish, looking almost boyish in their awkwardness. "Grandma," Michael said softly, "we heard you've been helping at the center again." Daniel lifted the dish. We, brought dinner. Thought you might be tired. Margaret looked at them carefully. Not angry now. Not afraid. Just watching. Come in, she said quietly. They stepped inside and placed the dish on the counter. For a moment no one spoke. The house felt different with them in it. Not as it used to be, and not as it had been in the worst moment. Something in between. Michael cleared his throat. We want to help, Grandma, if you'll let us. Daniel nodded quickly. Anything you need. Rides, lifting boxes, setting up chairs, whatever. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Are you offering out of guilt, or out of wanting to be better? Daniel's voice cracked. Both. Michael stepped forward. We know we can't fix what we did with words, so we're here to show you. Margaret looked into their eyes, and for the first time since the road, she saw genuine effort, not perfection, just effort. You can help at the center this weekend, she said finally. Come quietly. Don't draw attention. Just be useful. Both men nodded eagerly. Yes, Grandma, Michael said. Whatever you say, Daniel added. Over the next weeks, Margaret's community circle grew. Seniors who had once isolated themselves came back to life under her care. She told stories, organized activities, helped them build memory boxes, listened to the grief they carried quietly. Her presence became a lifeline, and Michael and Daniel showed up too. Not once, not twice, but consistently. They carried supplies, served food, fixed broken chairs, helped seniors who needed extra hands for crafts. They didn't ask for praise. They didn't expect forgiveness. They just came. People in town noticed. Margaret Bennett is back, someone whispered at the grocery store. Her grandsons are trying to make things right, another said at church. That family's healing, someone mentioned at the cafe. Margaret heard some of it, but she didn't care about the talk. She cared about the truth. Little by little, peace began to grow inside her, not because the pain vanished, but because love was finding its way back in through the cracks. Her legacy was no longer shaped by the road where she was abandoned. It was shaped by the lives she touched, the hearts she healed, the community she helped lift up. She was becoming something she hadn't felt in a long time, whole. And soon, a moment was coming, one she didn't expect, that would show her just how much her life had meant to others. A moment planned in secret by the very grandsons who once broke her heart. As the weeks passed, the small community center transformed in ways Margaret couldn't have imagined. The senior circle she led became a bright spot in the lives of dozens of people who had once felt forgotten. The room that used to hold only a handful of members now filled with laughter, soft conversations, and the quiet strength of people sharing their stories. Margaret showed up for them with the same gentle devotion she'd once poured into her grandsons. She brought homemade cookies, shared memories of Harold, taught simple recipes, helped trembling hands hold scissors or turn pages in storybooks. Her presence stitched the community back together in places that had torn over time. And consistently, without fail, Michael and Daniel showed up too. They didn't just come for her. They came for the people she cared about. They arrived early to set up tables. They stayed late to clean the floors. They drove seniors home after events. They carried groceries. They repaired equipment no one else knew how to fix. Sometimes they worked quietly in the background, unnoticed. Other times they stepped forward, laughing with the older men or helping someone who needed a steady arm. They didn't talk about the road. They didn't bring up forgiveness. They didn't ask for approval. They simply served. And Margaret, watching from a distance, felt something inside her soften, little by little. She didn't rush the feeling. She didn't force healing. She let it happen at the pace her heart allowed. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the town's water tower, Tom walked her home after a long day at the center. The evening air smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke from chimneys starting up for the season. You've become the heartbeat of that place, Tom said, smiling gently. Margaret shook her head. Oh, I'm just helping a little. A little? Tom chuckled. Margaret, half those folks get out of bed because they know they'll see you that day. She blushed lightly, looking down at her shoes. I never thought I'd matter like this at my age. Tom stopped walking and looked at her with that steady sincerity she had come to rely on. You matter more now than ever. You're showing people what it means to live with purpose. Margaret let the words settle in her chest. She didn't always feel strong, but she could see glimpses of strength in the reflections of others who watched her with gratitude. But she had no idea the biggest reflection was still coming. A week later, the community center coordinator called her early in the morning. "Margaret, we'd love your help at the center today. Could you come by a little earlier than usual? Around 11? Margaret agreed, though she wondered why the time was different. She walked to the center, bundled in her cardigan, the crisp air touching her cheeks. When she opened the door, the lights were dimmed. For a moment, she thought she had the wrong day. Then the lights flicked on. Surprise! The room erupted in applause. Dozens of seniors stood smiling, many holding handmade signs and cards. The tables were decorated with flowers and photos of Margaret volunteering, smiling, cooking, talking with people, hugging those who needed comfort. Margaret's hand flew to her chest. What is all this?" Ruth stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "This is for you, Margaret, for everything you've done for us, for giving so much of yourself." Margaret's lips trembled. "I didn't expect." "You deserve it," Ruth said. "Every bit of it." Then she noticed something else. Standing near the back of the room were Michael and Daniel. They weren't dressed in their work clothes. They wore simple shirts and shy smiles, holding something wrapped in brown paper. They approached slowly, almost nervously. "Grandma," Michael began softly, "we wanted to do something for you, but nothing felt big enough. So we made this," Daniel added, holding out the package. "It's for the community center, for your group." Margaret took the package and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a beautifully crafted wooden box with brass corners and a polished surface. Etched onto the top were the words, "Margaret's memory chest for stories, worth keeping her breath caught." Michael continued in a shaky voice, "We built it ourselves. We wanted the seniors to have a place to put their memories, the way you kept ours." Daniel swallowed hard. "And if you'll let us, we want to help you with your group every week. We want to show up for your community the way we didn't show up for you." Margaret stared at the box, her eyes flooding. She looked up at her grandsons. Their faces were open, vulnerable, sincere. Not boys, not fully redeemed men, but people trying, really trying, to make things right. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she reached out and took both of their hands. "I forgive you," she whispered. Both men broke down instantly, collapsing into her embrace with sobs they'd been holding for months. Margaret held them tightly, her aged hands steady on their backs. "It hurt me deeply," she said softly, her voice warm but firm. "But I see your hearts now, and I believe in what you're becoming." They cried harder, clinging to her like they had as little boys. When they finally pulled away, the room of seniors clapped through their own tears. Love, real love, the unconditional kind, filled the space like light filling a dark room. Later that afternoon, the memory chest was placed in the center of the table. Seniors gathered around it, placing photos, letters, small keepsakes, each item a fragment of a life lived, a piece of a legacy preserved. Margaret watched with pride, knowing the box wasn't just for them. It was for her, too. When the gathering ended and people began to leave, Margaret sat on a bench outside the center, the setting sun painting the sky in soft peach tones. Michael and Daniel walked her home, one on each side, as if protecting something fragile and precious. At her doorstep, Michael hesitated. "Grandma, do you think someday we'll be the grandsons you deserve?" Margaret smiled gently, her eyes warm. "You're on your way." Daniel took a deep breath. "Can we come back tomorrow? Help with the memory chest?" "Yes," she said. "Come back tomorrow." And the day after. They hugged her tightly before walking away, talking quietly between themselves, already planning the next project. Margaret stepped onto her porch and looked out at the quiet road. The same place where her life had broken open now felt like the place where everything had come full circle. Tom drove by and slowed down, tipping his hat. "Seems like a good day, Margaret." "It is." she replied. "It really is." That night, sitting in Harold's old armchair, Margaret closed her eyes and let everything sink in. She had lived through abandonment, heartbreak, betrayal. She had lived through loneliness and silence. But she had also lived through forgiveness, restoration, and love, returning in small, steady steps. Her story wasn't one of suffering. It was one of endurance, of purpose, of transformation. On the table beside her sat a small photo from the memory chest. Michael and Daniel as toddlers, both laughing wildly as she held them in her arms. She touched the photo gently. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, "for giving me the strength to stay." And the story closed not with bitterness, not with revenge, but with something far stronger. A legacy rebuilt, a family restored, and a grandmother whose heart, tested, bruised, but never broken, became the light that guided them all home. Margaret's life settled into a new rhythm in the months that followed. It wasn't fast and it wasn't grand. It was gentle, quiet, filled with small routines that made her feel like the world still had room for her. She woke up earlier than most mornings, sometimes before the sun rose, listening to the hum of the heater and the soft creaks of the old house as it warmed. She made herself oatmeal with a bit of honey. She watered her plants. She folded and refolded the same sweater she had worn for years. Her days were simple, but they were no longer lonely. Michael and Daniel became a regular part of that rhythm. At first they came on weekends, staying for an hour or two, helping with chores, checking on her. But as the weeks passed, those visits grew more frequent. They began stopping by after work, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes bringing nothing but their presence. One Tuesday afternoon, Michael arrived with 2 bags of apples. "Got these from a farm stand," he said, setting them on the counter. "Thought you'd like to bake something. Or we could bake together, if you want." Margaret laughed softly. "You? Bake?" Michael shrugged with a sheepish grin. "I'm trying." They peeled apples at her kitchen table, their hands working slowly as sunlight streamed through the window. Margaret taught him how to slice the fruit thin enough so it cooked evenly, how to mix cinnamon and sugar the right way. Michael listened carefully. He wanted to learn everything, not just the recipe, her way of doing things. On another day, Daniel arrived with a new blanket. "Thought you might like something warm," he said awkwardly, holding it out. Margaret touched the soft fabric. "It's lovely, sweetheart." Daniel swallowed hard. "Grandma, can I stay a while? Maybe watch one of those old shows you like?" She nodded and stepped aside so he could enter. They sat in the living room together, watching an old rerun of a show Margaret used to watch with Harold. Daniel didn't talk much, but he didn't need to. His presence was enough. The boys helped her in ways she didn't ask for. They fixed a loose porch railing, repainted her fence, repaired a cabinet door that had been sticking for years. They even installed 3 grab bars in her bathroom. Not because she requested them, but because Daniel said, "We should have done this before. You shouldn't be moving around without something to hold on to." Margaret knew they were trying to make up for what they had done, but she also sensed something deeper forming, a new bond. A bond shaped not by guilt, but by daily acts of care, patience, and thoughtfulness. Still, there were days when Margaret felt tired in a way she couldn't explain. Not just old, not just worn, something quieter, deeper. Something like her body was slowly preparing her for an ending she didn't fear, but quietly understood. She kept those feelings to herself at first, but Tom noticed. One morning he knocked on her door holding a small bag of oranges. "Thought you could use some vitamin C." Margaret smiled as she let him in. "You're always thinking about me." "Someone's got to," he said lightly, but then his expression softened. "You look tired today, more than usual." She didn't lie. She didn't pretend. Not with Tom. "I'm slowing down," she admitted. "More than I'd like." Tom nodded, his eyes gentle but honest. "It's all right to say that out loud. You've carried a lot, Margaret." She sat down at the table. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," Tom said immediately. "Not to me, not to the boys, not to this community." He paused. "But you do need to rest. Let people take care of you now." That thought was strange to her. She had spent a lifetime taking care of others. Harold, the boys, the seniors at church. She wasn't used to being the one who needed help, but as the months passed, she realized Tom was right. She needed to slow down. She still went to the community center, but less often. Sometimes she simply sat and watched others complete projects she once led. The seniors didn't mind. They loved having her there, even if all she did was smile and nod and offer a word of kindness. One afternoon, Esther held her hand and said softly, "You've done enough, Margaret. Let us carry the work for you a while." Margaret squeezed her hand. "I'm not ready to stop." "You don't have to stop," Esther said. "Just rest. We'll take it from here." Margaret began to accept the truth she had been avoiding. Her time was narrowing, tapering gently like the end of a long, warm day. Her body felt heavier, her breath shorter, her steps slower. She occasionally forgot small things, where she placed her glasses, whether she had locked the door. The boys noticed and adjusted. They created a medication chart, installed better lighting, checked in constantly. They drove her to every doctor appointment, no matter how small. One evening, after walking her to bed, Michael lingered in the doorway. "Grandma, do you think you'll be okay tonight?" Margaret smiled, her eyes soft. "I'll be fine, sweetheart. Go home and rest." Michael swallowed hard. "Call me if you need anything." "Anything." "I will," she said, though she knew she wouldn't. The truth was, Margaret wasn't afraid of what was happening. Not really. She had lived a long life, full of love and struggle, and memories that had shaped her into the woman she was. She didn't want to leave her grandsons, not now that she had them back, but she also felt a quiet acceptance settling into her bones. A natural ending, a gentle one. She didn't talk about it often, but she allowed herself to feel it. As the weeks passed, the boys became her constant companions. They learned her routines. They knew how she liked her tea, strong with a drop of milk. They knew she needed help with the buttons on her cardigan on cold mornings. They knew when she wanted company and when she needed silence. They even learned how to fold her linens the exact way she liked, long ways first, then thirds. Her home became filled with signs of them. Grocery bags on the counter, folded jackets by the door, notes stuck to the fridge saying things like, "Call us if you wake up feeling dizzy," or "We'll be back at 5. But as Margaret slowed, something else grew stronger, her sense of peace. One late afternoon she sat on the porch wrapped in Daniel's blanket, watching the sky shift into a soft orange glow. The boys were fixing a squeaky step on her porch. Tom was trimming her shrubs. Birds called from the trees. The world felt steady. She thought to herself, "I'm not afraid of the night anymore." In the final weeks, Margaret became even more tired. She sat more than she walked, slept more than she talked. Her voice grew softer, her appetite smaller, but her eyes remained warm, clear and full of gratitude. One night after Michael made her tea and Daniel fluffed her pillows, she held their hands and said quietly, "I'm proud of you both." Michael's eyes filled immediately. "Grandma!" Daniel's voice trembled. "We're proud of you too." She shook her head gently. "No, sweetheart. You don't have to say that. We mean it," Daniel said. "You've changed our lives." Margaret smiled. "You changed mine, too." They stayed with her a while, talking about nothing and everything. Childhood memories, the old tire swing, Harold's jokes, pancake Saturdays. They laughed softly together, and Margaret could almost feel time folding in on itself, letting her relive the sweetest years. Later, Michael kissed her forehead. "Sleep well, Grandma." Daniel held her hand one last time before turning off the light. "We love you." "I love you too," she whispered. They went home, promising to be back early the next morning. Margaret settled into bed, pulling the blanket up to her chest. She closed her eyes and listened to the familiar sounds of her home. The hum of the heater, the faint rattle of wind against the windows, the creak of the porch boards, her heartbeat slowing into a peaceful rhythm. She thought of Harold, of her parents, of every memory she had tucked away inside her. She thought of the boys' faces earlier that evening, full of love she never thought she'd experience again. She whispered into the quiet, "Thank you." And as the moonlight stretched across her room, Margaret drifted into sleep. She never woke up. The next morning, when the boys arrived and found her, the house was still, peaceful, warm. There was no sign of struggle, no fear, just a soft smile on her face, as if she had slipped into a dream she'd been waiting for. Michael broke first, collapsing to his knees beside the bed, sobbing into her blanket. Daniel wrapped his arms around his brother, crying into his shoulder. Tom, who had come by to trim a loose branch in her yard, stepped inside when he saw their car and understood instantly. He removed his hat and stood silently at the doorway, tears shining in his eyes. Linda arrived moments later, running into the room with trembling hands. She cupped Margaret's face and whispered, "You did so well, Mom. You stayed strong until the end." The house filled with quiet cries, soft prayers, and loving hands holding one another. The funeral was small, the way Margaret would have wanted. The pastor spoke of her kindness, her devotion, her unwavering heart. Seniors from the community center filled the pews, holding memory boards they had made under her guidance. Some carried flowers, some carried photos, some simply carried the parts of their hearts she had held together. Michael and Daniel stood at the front, hands shaking, voices cracking as they shared a short tribute. Michael said, "She saved us." Daniel said, "She gave us more than love. She gave us a way to live." After the service, the community center unveiled a plaque near the memory chest in honor of Margaret Bennett, who taught us that love is a daily choice. People paused to touch the plaque, to whisper thanks, to remember the woman who had changed an entire community simply by being steady, gentle, and true. In the months that followed, the boys continued her work at the center. They showed up every week, guiding seniors, fixing things, sitting with those who needed company. They kept her home just as she left it, not as a shrine, but as a reminder of the woman who had rebuilt them. Sometimes late in the afternoon they sat on her porch drinking tea the way she used to, talking about her, laughing at memories that hurt and healed at the same time. They didn't try to replace her. They didn't pretend the pain was gone, but they lived the way she taught them to live, slowly, kindly, with attention to what mattered. Margaret's story didn't end on the road. It didn't end in hurt. It ended in love. Love returned, love rebuilt, love remembered, and in every life she touched, in every quiet act of care, in every moment of forgiveness, Margaret never left at all.